Hey everyone, wanted to talk to you today about how to go about adjusting your client's expectations. So I know that we've all done this, and I'm sure that you've done this where you've brought on a client, you have done work outside of scope to keep them happy, or because hey, this little thing, it's not worth actually going back to increase the scope and charge them more for it. Not a big deal. I'm going to do it just to be a good partner, and then you end up doing it again and again and again, and you end up realizing that this client is so far out of scope and you're either losing money or not making the margins that you need to make, or whatever you end up recognizing at whatever point that is. And what do you do when that happens? How do you end up fixing the relationship? So I was working with a client not too long ago who was having this exact problem, and the client was being told that, hey, this item is outside of scope, and it's going to cost this much for us to continue doing this work for you. And it was something that the client had been doing, unfortunately, for multiple years and not charging the client. And the client was pissed and sent an email that was extremely angry and was yelling at them, essentially, right, via email, and was saying that this is absolutely ridiculous. I've never paid for this before. This is something that is included in my price, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And the client came to me with, how do I fix this? It was a pretty significant size client. How do I go about repairing the relationship now that this has happened? And so the client had drafted, I told them first to go ahead and draft an email, send it to me, and they did, and it was very defensive. And what I ended up telling the client is to actually go through and recognize what they had done wrong. And what the agency did do wrong is that they had never told the client in the first place that this wasn't included in their scope, that they actually did have a defined scope. Thankfully, they had a defined scope as exactly what the deliverables were supposed to be with this client, but they didn't actually identify with the client that this item was not on that list of deliverables. So I told the agency, and the agency owner in this case, to actually apologize to the client for the fact that this was coming completely out of the blue and that it was something that they were unsure of. And then for one last time to let them know that this is something that we're going to do one last time, but the next time that it's necessary, in the next 30 days, we are going to have to actually start charging for it. And this is what the cost will be. What ended up happening, and asking for a phone call to actually review it with the client, have them understand, make sure that they are on a good page. What ended up happening with this particular client, because they had apologized, and rather than immediately being in the point of being defensive on the client side, they actually understood where it was, and they could no longer beat up an agency or beat up a client or beat up their vendor, their partner that they had been working with for years, when they had already admitted the piece that they had done. And so this is sort of an essential, reminds me of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. Definitely recommend you check it out. It's tons of information about how to engage with people and how to maintain great relationships. And they do talk about this sort of dynamic a lot, that when you have someone that is accepting blame and accepting fault for what they've done wrong, that it changes the dynamic between the two individuals. And what ended up happening in this scenario is that the client actually ended up paying for it, not only in that 30-day period of time, but paying for that immediately for that month, but also having a conversation about what overall needs that they had, and increasing the scope that they had with this client almost 2 times the amount of monthly revenue that they had before, because they admitted blame in this situation. So I think it's so incredibly important that what I do see happen so frequently in business, and not just with agencies, but I see it frequently happen in business overall, is that businesses fail to recognize the piece that they have had and the blame that they had in a situation. And the more frequently that we do that, the better relationships that we're going to have with people. And it's the same thing that goes back to any relationship that you have in your life. It's not just business, but having that relationship and building that relationship of trust, building that relationship of ownership, building that relationship with that person on the other side of the table is so incredibly important. And I do highly recommend that you do this with existing clients that you do have this problem with, making sure that you do have a client expectation process, and a process that allows for these out of scope items to no longer continue. If you have any questions about that, please let me know. I've got tons of blog articles and podcast episodes and things about client expectation process. Let me know. Happy to help.